Today, we are discussing a topic that I have titled Integrated Coastal Zone Management for Equity and Sustainability in Africa's Blue Economy. And I believe you've already been introduced to the concept of blue economy and also this concept of equity and sustainability. So today we are going to discuss one of the tools by which we can enhance equity and sustainability as far as blue economy is concerned. And this tool is what we call integrated coastal zone management. So this is one of the tools in addition with marine spatial planning, fisheries management, and some other tools we'll be looking at in which we put together to attain sustainability and also equity when it comes to blue economy. So I would like to tell a little story before we proceed. I don't know how many, I cannot see all of you now because I'm sharing my screen. So please feel free to unmute and answer any question where necessary, or typing, so because I want this to be very interactive if you don't understand anything before we go on. Okay, so this is the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Kindly type in the chat if you have ever heard about this assessment before, quickly, in 2 seconds. Okay, I have a no from Ivaldo. Anyone heard about it? Okay, first time. Okay, so that's great. So, okay, Sonigito has heard about it. Right. Thank you very much for the response. So this assessment actually was conducted between 2001 and 2005. It was launched by the late Kofi Annan when he was the UN Secretary General at that time. And this actually was launched to assess the condition of ecosystems around the world, to know their state, their current state, and the trends that they were undergoing at the time. And this assessment was conducted by different scientists, a number of scientists who were looking at different ecosystems, from coastal ecosystems, marine ecosystems, inland ecosystems, forests, a whole lot of ecosystems, just to understand their state. Because over the years, you know, there's been rapid population increase and rapid industrialization. So it was necessary to find out the state of our ecosystems and whether they were able to support, you know, the rate of population growth. So I will invite you, when you have time, to look at this ecosystem assessment, and it's interesting. You find out the various reports that were put together out of this assessment. So this assessment, after it was conducted, it was realized that most of the ecosystems were rapidly deteriorating, you know, and it's obvious, even now we can see it all around us. And some of the changes that have occurred included disease emergence, abrupt alteration in water quality. When we talk about water quality, we are talking about the states in which water supports aquatic life, you know, the state of nutrients in the water, the temperature of the water, the salinity of the water. It was revealed in that assessment that there was abrupt alterations in the water quality. And there were a lot of dead zones. When we talk about dead zones, we are talking about areas in the water that lacks oxygen. So most of the coastal waters that were assessed, it was realized that there were dead zones in these areas. And I remember that recently, sometime last year, there was beaching of dolphins and mass killings of certain fish species along the coast of Ghana. And scientists were attributing this to dead zones in our coastal waters. So these are some of the issues that were revealed with our, especially I'm focusing on coastal waters, but the assessment was conducted for different ecosystems. I'm talking about coastal waters because that is the area we are treating today. Also, the assessment revealed that fisheries were collapsing and there were shifts, major shifts in regional climate. So this assessment, we call it the MEA for short. The MEA assessment, after all of the results that were put together, recommended that we should adopt an ecosystem-based management approach for improving conditions of the ecosystems. Now, when we talk about ecosystem-based management approach, we are talking about management approaches that take into consideration the state of the ecosystems, the well-being of the ecosystems. And the idea is that in as much as we are developing, in as much as we are utilizing our ecosystems, we should have their sustainability at heart or in our minds. So this is the kind of paradigm thinking that brought us here where we are now to the issue of blue economy. Blue economy basically talking about developing economies around our water bodies, including the inland water bodies, marine water bodies, and having the ecosystems that support these economic activities at the back of our minds. And by now, I am sure we all know that this concept surfaced in 2012 at the UN Sustainable Development Conference in Rio de Janeiro. Okay, so moving on, there is this diagram, beautiful diagram that Del Tares put together to give us an idea of what the blue economy concept is all about. And I'm sure we are very familiar with this concept by now. Basically, we are looking at having all economic activities coexisting together, having institutional arrangements, looking at socioeconomic arrangements, and then having the natural side also all coming together to drive development in our coastal and marine ecosystems. And then we have here the various stakeholders coming together to be at one table to discuss how this kind of sustainability we are talking about can be achieved. So we have investors on the board, on the table, we have NGOs on the table, the private sector, researchers, government, and other stakeholders all coming together to enhance the blue economy. Now, how do we achieve this kind of ideal situation we see in this beautiful diagram here? And that is the focus of the discussion today. We are looking at different strategies or tools, depending on how you look at it, that can help us to arrive at sustainable blue economy development. Examples of these tools include integrated coastal zone management, watershed management, fisheries management, marine protected areas. We even have marine spatial planning. We have large marine ecosystems. All these are strategies that have come up. We think about when we look at the issue of developing blue economies. Now, integrated coastal zone management, also referred to as integrated coastal management, It's a management tool that originated from the Earth Summit at Rio, the same Rio, in 1992. So you would realize that this strategy or this tool has been in existence for quite a long time. It's not a new concept. And it's the procedures and the mode of implementation when it comes to this ICZM or ICM is spelled out in a document that came out from this conference. And this document is known as Agenda 21. I believe this is a document that is familiar to almost all of us when we talk about Agenda 21. So this is a document that came out from that Earth Summit at Rio in 1992. Now, the document spells out the ICZM, the policies, the implementation of it, the reasons for establishing coastal zone management plans. It's all in the document. So what is this coastal zone management we are talking about? When we talk about ICZM or ICM, we define it as a continuous and a dynamic process by which we make decisions for the sustainable use, development, and protection of coastal and marine areas and resources. This is a definition by Sinsen and Necht in 1998. So emphasis is placed on decisions being made for sustainable use, development, and protection of coastal and marine areas and resources. Now, I would want to say here that coastal zone management, as the name suggests, is looking at managing of coastal areas, not offshore marine areas. The difference here, which marine spatial planning complements, is that integrated coastal zone management is for the coastal area, and marine spatial planning extends into the marine areas, which includes the EEZ, exclusive economic zones of different countries. So for today, we are going to talk about managing the coastal zone. Now, I would pause here and ask briefly what you think about what the coastal zone is. Just on mute and let me know what you think about where the coastal zone is. What is the coastal zone? Anyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Uriah is from Liberia.
Okay, Uriah.
The coastal zone comprises of the zone adjacent the shoreline and part of the economic exclusive zone, and maybe into the deep waters. But most of the area around the coast, around the beach, and further inland into the wetland, they are much closer to the coastal area to be considered as the coastal zone.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Anyone, one more submission before we go on? Any ideas about what the coastal zone is? Okay. So just to back up a bit, we are talking about coastal areas or the coastal zone because when it comes to the definition of blue economy by the African Union, we are also talking about the inland water bodies, right? Not just the marine areas or not just the ocean. So it's important to also know the kind of tools by which we can manage the inland water bodies as well as the marine areas. So the coastal area is actually the interface zone, and we will just look at that now. So a definition of the coastal zone. Actually, it's been very, very tough to define what the coastal zone is, because it's a very fussy area. But then this definition from Ketchum kind of simplifies it. It talks about the band of dry land and its adjacent ocean space in which terrestrial processes and land uses directly affect oceanic processes and uses, and vice versa. So what this is saying is that you have the land space, but is that area of the land where ocean processes and uses affect that area, and then that area of the ocean where land processes and uses also affect it. Now, the extent of this inland and seaward boundaries of the coastal zone, it varies considerably from country to country. Different countries have different definitions of where the coastal zone starts and where it ends. And these different definitions are usually based on the objectives and the needs of the management program that's being undertaken for the coastal zone. And it also depends on the political, administrative, legal, ecological, and any kind of practical consideration that the country would decide to take. So this definition alone is even giving us a sense of how difficult it is to have a universal boundary or limit for the coastal zone. Usually it is left to the countries to decide. Okay, so in the next slide, I'm going to show you different diagrams of the coastal zone, because when I was preparing this slide, I was just trying to find out how people have defined coastal zones and came across very different diagrams. So let's see this very first one. Here, I hope you can see the cursor, but we have the coastal zone being an area where the settlements, human settlements start, that is the inland area, towards the sea to a few meters away from the shoreline, right? And that's the legal definition for the coastal zone. Then you have the coastal region, which extends a bit more to include settlements towards, the upland side. So this is one definition of the coastal zone with this diagram. Now let's see diagram B. Now diagram B is showing the coastal zone as an area where inland, where mangroves end. And I hope we all know what mangroves are. They are special trees that adapt to growing in saline environments. And so in this document, in this diagram, we are looking at the coastal zone starting from the end of the mangrove trees that depicts the end of the influence of salty water towards the coastal area to where the continental slope is. So this is a definition of coastal zone in this diagram. Now let's see diagram C. Same coastal zone definition starts from this being the shoreline, right? 1 kilometer inland from the shoreline and towards the ocean where the continental, you have the slope, the continental slope. So this is another definition of coastal zone with this diagram. Now let's see D. D is also showing the limits of a coastal zone as ending at the coastal sea and then going inland towards where you have where the upland starts. So this is another very interesting diagram to show the extent of the coastal zone. So the point here is that this is it. Different definitions are given, Some are legal, some are just political, depending on the country's focus. So in the coastal zone, there are areas where we have productive ecosystems, and productive ecosystems means that we have a lot of socioeconomic activities happening there, because once the ecosystems are productive, they attract socioeconomic activities. And that also means that we are going to have some user conflicts. And once there are human beings operating in a particular system, we are sure to expect certain threats to the ecosystems. Now, moving on, these are just a few pictures to show the kinds of ecosystems we can find within the coastal zone. In the first picture here to my left, we see a lagoon, and this is a beautiful picture of a lagoon in the western region of Ghana that I personally took. Down beneath it, we have an estuary. An estuary is where a river meets the sea or the ocean. And these areas produce some very conducive environment for certain species to thrive. Now, the last one on my left is the coral reef. And usually we see this around islandic areas where there are beautiful corals that support various species as well. Again, in the coastal zone, we find sandy beaches. And sandy beaches, we know its importance. We're talking about certain economic activities like recreation, talking about landing of boats and the likes. Now we have salt pans in the coastal zone. We have marshes. Marshes support various, they provide habitats and also feeding grounds for various species, including birds and fishes, and they support a lot of tourism activities. Now we also have rocky shores, and in rocky shores, we know that they also support various shellfish habitats, as well as fish, finfish. And last but not the least that I have on this slide are mangroves. And mangroves are super trees. They provide protection, they regulate the carbon, they provide shelter, feeding grounds, and a whole lot. Mangroves are special trees that really help in protecting coastal ecosystems. And there are many more others that are not here. I will invite you to read some more about coastal ecosystems. Now let's move on to the demographic structure of coastal areas. We know that a lot of people are attracted to coastal areas because of how productive these zones are. And these are a few demographic figures that I would like to share with you. We know that there are more than 600 million people. That is about 10% of the world's population live in coastal areas. And they live in these the coastal areas that are less than 10 meters above sea level. So that is like really close to the shoreline. We have 10% of the whole world's population living in this very tiny stretch. Then when we look at about 100 kilometers away from the shoreline, we have 40% of the world's population. That's about 2.4 billion, people living in these areas as well. When we talk about the Great Lakes of Africa, we have over 50 million people who are estimated to be living in these areas. Now, in this diagram, what we are seeing here is the distribution of people in West Africa, and it is showing the intensity of people, the aggregation of settlements. And the very deep parts show, of course, how densely populated those areas are, and the light part shows how less dense the populations are. And as you can see, we have a lot of concentration along the coasts all over. Now, this issue of coastal population densities is even expected to rise. In this figure here, we see that Africa's population as at 2018 was 1.2 billion. Now in 2030, it's expected to rise to 1.6 billion. And 2063, 3 billion people living in Africa. And if you extrapolate that to the concentration of those who who reside in the coastal areas or even migrate towards coastal areas because of how productive those places are, then we can tell that even the kind of threats we face with the coastal areas now are supposed to increase. And if we are talking about blue economy, then we should be thinking about ways to manage the coastal ecosystems well to accommodate all of this population increase. These are just a few pictures to show socioeconomic activities that take place within the coastal zone. And we are well familiar with all of this. We see beach recreation, fishing. We see oil and gas infrastructure. Some actually do come very close to the coast. Then we have shellfish harvesting, where we have mangroves and rocks. You see a lot of shellfish there, and particularly women are involved in this kind of economic activities. Now, aquaculture is catching up really fast because we are losing a lot of our fish stocks. And so, yes, aquaculture is also something that is on the rise when in coastal areas actually do provide the conducive ecosystems for scaling it up. Now, port infrastructure, we know most of the international trade actually is through shipping, and it's even expected to rise more. And coastal areas provide the space for establishing these kinds of infrastructure. We also have sand mining in certain places, as well as numerous activities that I haven't shown here, but I believe you are aware of. Now, let's proceed to special conflicts. Like I had said initially, with all of these activities that are drawn to the coastal areas because of how productive these places are, it is very, very likely that we have certain conflicting activities. And this is a map of different activities happening along the western coast of Ghana. And this is a map that was designed by Hen Puano, an NGO that operates here in Ghana. And I am showing this just to give us a sense of the kinds of uses that are happening in the coastal areas and the special conflicts that arise out of that. And I believe you looked at something like this when you treated marine spatial planning yesterday. So this is a spatial plan that shows you what is happening, and immediately you can see where there are overlays and where conflicts may arise. So let's have a look at this. I hope you can see clearly, but in the legend, we can see major rivers, okay, in this area. Then we can see forest reserves, okay, in the green patches. So here in this area, this is a forest reserve. This is also a forest reserve. Then we have one also here. Okay, then we see wetlands, okay. This whole area, the wetlands. We see the airstrips also. then major towns. Then we see the Western Region Gas Pipeline passing through all of this, passing through the rivers, passing through the wetlands, all the way there. Now, we see port sites, sites that have been demarcated for port infrastructure. We see a refinery here, another port facility here. There is Volta River Authority power generation going on somewhere here. We see residential areas in the red patches. We see a free trade zone settlement for bauxite somewhere here. And then there is a water plant also in this area. So already you can see a lot of activities happening here. All these activities are going to generate some kind of threats to the coastal ecosystems on which they are overlaid. Now, talking about threats, we've seen the productive ecosystems, we've seen some activities, economic, social activities ongoing there. We see certain conflicts. Now we want to see some threats to coastal ecosystems. And again, we know that when we are talking about blue economy, we are talking about developing economies. We need to be mindful that these ecosystems can support the economies we want to build. Now we have issues of overfishing. And overfishing also goes along, when I talk about overfishing, I am linking it to illegal fishing as well, unreported catches and unregulated fishing. And the problem with overfishing is that when we continue to overfish certain species, we destabilize the whole food chain or the food web, if you would like to call that. And these are issues that we should be regulating our fisheries. We talk about distant water fleets coming so close to the areas demarcated for artisanal fisheries, and there are a whole lot of conflicts. And these are issues we should be thinking about solving. Now, there is a lot of biodiversity loss as well as habitat loss because of different developmental activities going on in the coastal areas. I will pause here to read a few comments so that I'll see if I can address that as we talk along. So Elsie is asking, how have Ramsar sites in Ghana played a role in the growth of the country's blue economy, quite apart from its contribution to conserving biodiversity? Really great. Okay. Sorry about that. Linda is asking, is it possible to fully avoid these spatial conflicts? Though we have marine protected areas, sanctuaries, Ramsar sites, etc., people still encroach on them, especially in our part of the world. Okay, thank you for these questions. I will try to address them either now or maybe after the presentation. Thank you very much. So moving on, we also see a lot of illegal mining activities, and this is very peculiar to Ghana. I don't know about the other African countries, but this is really destroying our water bodies. And in this picture, you can clearly see the difference in color between the river that is joining the sea. And this is really appalling, because then once the water quality is reduced, we are also looking at massive fish kills. At a point, these water bodies will not even be able to support biodiversity. These are all issues worth talking about, discussing, and finding solutions to. Now, sea level rise as a result of climate change is causing a lot of erosions along the shores of not just Ghana, but the entire, African coastal areas. And now we are investing into sea defense mechanisms that are also very costly to African nations. Now, we see the issue of pollution and the issue of piracy. For purpose of time, I wouldn't go so much into this, but we can discuss it later if need be. Okay, so now when we talk about integrated maritime coastal zone management, the emphasis is placed on integration. We are talking about not just looking at one sector approach of management, but integrating different sectors, different levels of government, different international players. And so let's just go through them one by one. When we talk about integration at an intergovernmental level, we are looking at national level integration together with local level players. And we are talking about not just the central government kind of management, but co-management approaches. Then we talk about spatial integration, where issues, land-based issues are integrated with coastal-based issues. For example, if we have, let's say, all these beach resorts along the coast that are springing up all over the place. Now we are having interest for having recreational activities at the beaches. How are we managing waste production from these development activities that affect the ocean? So we have land and ocean interface integration, how we look at issues, management of issues from these different perspectives. Now we also have science management integration, okay? Management that is science-based. So that's another level of integration we are looking at when we talk about integrated coastal zone management. Then we look at integrating sectors, integrating fisheries issues with tourism issues, with oil and gas issues, with port. So all of these sectors, how do we manage to bring them together to ensure not just sustainability, but also equity? Now we look at also international integrations, because we have shared stocks, we have endangered species, we have issues of maritime transport. All of these transcend beyond one single nations. So there should be a way of integrating different, we talk about transboundary integration. So these are all different levels of integration, and you can see that without bringing all parties to the table to look at the bigger picture, it will be really difficult to do integrated coastal zone management. So this is a diagram showing the process of coastal zone management. My time is running out, so permit me to be a bit fast, but if you don't understand anything, feel free to draw me back. So this process is actually iterative. So it's not a linear process. We start with identification of the issues. We have had a look at so many things in the coastal zone, but when you want to conduct coastal zone management, of course, you have to profile the coastal area. By profiling, we are looking at the current status of the coastal environment. You take it step by step, you look at the physical profile, the social profile, cultural profile, economic, as well as governance. So you ask the questions, why is it this way? How and why? You ask all these questions. Then that will help us to identify gaps, okay? Where we do not have information. Do we need to go in for new information? How do we get that information? So all of this is done at the identification of issues stage. Now, once you have identified the issues, once you have known the gaps, you go now to do your planning. And in the planning process, we are looking at bringing everybody to the table. We are looking at gender integration. All of these are important issues that have to be taken into consideration. The idea is to set objectives, smart objectives for the coastal zone management process. look at the levels and the directions of integration, whether vertical integration or horizontal integration. Look at institutional arrangements, who takes the lead in the management process and all of that. So that goes into the planning. Now, the next stage is to look at funding it. If you have a management plan in place, how do you fund it? And funds can come from either government, central government funds, or funds that are generated at local level, giving autonomy to local level institutions to generate their own funds, or from donor funding. Then we go to implementation at different levels. Implementation can be at national level or at regional level, or even at the local level. You can implement coastal zone management at local level. Look at what is feasible and you do that. Then monitoring and evaluation. Of course, once you have a plan in place, you look at whether the plan is achieving its purpose, you monitor it, you evaluate it throughout the whole cycle of the process. I have oversimplified this, but of course, I'm sure we'll have time to go through if there is a need to do that. Now, this is talking about enablers of ICZM. What are some of the things or the conditions that will enable coastal zone management to thrive? And we know them. I'm just going to mention them. Skills, capacity development, research, investment, conservation, protection, gender equality. Yeah, that's my time there. So infrastructure, maritime security, domain awareness. What is interesting for me is political will. And I really like this diagram, this picture showing it. The political will to push the button and have it done. And so I would use the rest of the time to quickly talk about integrated coastal zone management in practice, focusing on a case of Ghana, what we've been able to do as far as integrated coastal zone management is concerned. I'm sure you will have time later to discuss amongst yourselves what is also happening in your various countries. Now, this is a map showing Ghana's definition of what the coastal zone is. And in this diagram, you see this yellow strip being the area where the depth is less than 30 meters. So it extends from actually so from inland, you have 75-meter contour inland till where you have the 100 fathom. A fathom is 6 feet, so you can do the calculation. So that's the extent of Ghana's coastal zone. Now, Ghana has done a lot of work when it comes to integrated coastal zone management in a bid to manage what happens in our coastal areas. And these are some of the noticeable steps or strides that we have taken in the country. We have a bunch of legal frameworks that have been set. I mentioned before that coastal zone management issues erupted around 1992 and along with the Agenda 21. So in compliance with Agenda 21, Ghana has actually set quite a number of legal frameworks that are listed here. Apart from that, we also have quite a number of legal frameworks that regulate protection of our ecosystems. And these include the Wetland Management Regulation and the likes. Now, beyond that, we've also gone ahead to have some plans and strategies that have been enacted as far as coastal zone management is concerned. And these include a National Environmental Action Plan. We have the draft Integrated Coastal Zone Plan. We have actually drafted the plan for coastal zone as far back as 1998. We've also conducted the coastal zone profiling for Ghana. And then we've also had the Coastal Zone Management Indicative Plan in 1990. Then we've also gone ahead to actually have certain projects in Ghana as far as integrated coastal zone management is concerned. And these are quite a number of them. For the purpose of time, I will not go through all of them. But it is interesting to note that after all of this, there is still no integrated coastal zone management policy in Ghana that looks at bringing all the issues together, what our main objective is, and how we are targeting it. That is still missing. Now, why is that? I talked about political will. There is lack of political will on the part of government and government institutions. Why? Because there are different priority sectors of development to address. Sadly, again, I wouldn't want to say it's ocean blindness or water blindness, but it's just priorities. So after all the work we have done over all these years, we still don't have a coastal zone management policy in place. What could be the way forward? Well, these are a few suggestions. Talking about funding, talking about intentionally putting budgetary allocations to developing our coastal areas or in managing our coastal zone. We talk about co-management arrangements. I made mention of it before, not just the central government management kind of thing, but then having top-down, bottom-up approaches meet at an equilibrium to be able to manage the coastal zone. We also talk about employment alternatives and diversification of livelihoods. And then we also talk about communication strategy. How have we packaged the story about coastal zones, their plight, the need to manage these areas well for our blue economy? These are all things that probably are missing that we can contribute to. Now, this is my final slide, and it is depicting some very ambitious steps that certain governments over the world have taken. And this is the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. And this panel is made up of different presidents who have committed to sustainably manage 100% of their national waters by 2025. I have always termed this as a very ambitious goal. We are in 2022. That means that in 2025, in 3 years, for example, Ghana, who is part of this ocean panel, has committed to manage 100% of our national waters by 2025. And not just Ghana, we have quite a number of countries, but then in Africa, apart from Ghana, we have Namibia and also Kenya. And other countries are being invited to join this panel to have the same commitment to protect their national waters. My question is, where do we go from here? How are we going to achieve this? How can we as early career ocean professionals contribute to this? And these are thoughts that I want to share with you for us to all think about and see how in our own small way we can contribute, as we also suggest ways for the different governments to take to achieve this ambition. So I would pause here so we can move into question and answers and discussions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sagoe, for that highly insightful presentation. I'm sure all the participants had a lot to learn from that, as I can clearly see from the number of questions and comments that we have. I know you already read 2 of them, but I'll just read over them again so that you can address them if you haven't been able to comprehensively do so in the course of the presentation. So Elsie says, how have Ramsar sites in Ghana played a role in the growth of the country's blue economy, quite apart from its contribution to conserving biodiversity? Would you like to answer them as I read them, or you want me to read through all of them and then?
Yeah, I think it will be easier to answer because then I would lose the questions. Okay, so thank you for that question, Elsie. I have particularly been very interested in this Ramsar site. They are an institutional framework put together to protect wetlands. The idea is really great, but I would say that most of these sites, when they are developed or when they are designed, do not have, I mean, it's quite recent that we've been talking about ocean financing and developing businesses out of conservation. It's a very relatively new area. But the idea is that when we put in these protection arrangements, we should also think about, for a long time, we were thinking about conservation being strict protection, no-go areas. We are protecting this place, don't go in there. And then we destabilize livelihoods and all of that. There's this new wave of thinking that when places are protected, you think about how it can also generate certain economic activities. And that's where we have ecotourism now. Ecotourism has now become a thing, a concept where you have tourism, which is an economic activity that is generated out of conservation efforts. And some countries are picking it up slowly. It's still a concept that is relatively new. And that's why we also involve or try to invite the private sectors and investors in conservation. You see, and it's all part of the integration we are talking about. It shouldn't be just one, okay, we are protecting the place, it is a sanctuary and no-go area, that is it. But how can we have, let's say, ecosystem-friendly activities that can still generate some level of economic activity without being harmful to the ecosystems? So these are things that as managers, as professionals coming up, we can be looking at. Innovation is a new word now. So this is what I can say about that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sagoe, for responding to that. Now, Linda wants to know whether it is possible to fully avoid these spatial conflicts. She says, though we have marine protected areas, sanctuaries, Ramsar sites, etc., people still encroach on them, especially in our part of the world. What can we do to better manage our desire to benefit from these ecosystems and also to preserve these ecosystems?
Yeah, thank you, Linda, for that question. I mean, these are human beings we are talking about, right? It's in our nature to be rebellious and all of that. But of course, there is, on one hand, education that is lacking, really. If you get into talking to the communities, doing community work, you realize that these communities, they are really interested in conserving the ecosystems when they are made to understand the role of these ecosystems in their well-being, in their lives, in their livelihoods, okay? That is one. Two, there is also this concept of, how do you call it? Valuation, ecosystem services valuation, okay? Where we try to attach some monetary value to ecosystems, especially those indirect ones that we do not see. And this is also a way of repackaging the story to users of the ecosystems to understand the need to conserve. Honestly, people will not be bothered about conserving ecosystems or even be mindful of it if they are not made to see the benefits. And usually it's easier when you see the benefits with some cash attached to it, you see. So this is another school of thought to have us try to, the economists, I don't know if we have any economists amongst us, but this is another area of study now. How do we put some economic values to some of these benefits we attain from the ecosystems to make people understand really the need to conserve it? But also, to go back a bit, you were asking if these conflicts can be avoided. The conflicts cannot be avoided. They can and cannot. Let me put it that way. Now, when we have a spatial plan, like I showed you, that easily shows you what is already existing or what is already happening in the space. It is now easier to see if you still admit more activities in a particular area or not. Sometimes we have certain conflicts because we do not even have any plan or any way of knowing what is going on and how chaotic the whole place is because of uses. That is one thing. Another thing is that you cannot avoid having people to have access to resources, right? They are common resources. And if you have access to it, I should also be able to have access to it. That's the place, that's where we have a place for negotiation, okay? Coming at the table together to negotiate based on the objectives we have for the area. Okay, for example, we have this huge issue now with fishing and oil and gas. Okay, it's a classic example we have. Now, fisher folks are complaining about losing fishing grounds because of oil and gas activities. And this is happening more or less because we do not even have a plan to see what we have allowed, what percentage of the water space have fisher folks lost as a result of the oil and gas activities or the oil rigs. Sometimes they complain, but their complaints may not even be valid. There may not be that conflict, but it is difficult to see. So the conflicts can be minimized or can be managed effectively when we use tools like GIS to map and understand what we have, where the conflicts are. Can these conflicts be synergized? You know, the uses, can they have a synergy to coexist? Or are they so conflicting that you have to relocate one person and have one person there? So all of these is what we are talking about here now. Okay, when you have a management plan, within that management plan, you use tools like spatial planning to have a map of the area to understand what's happening there and all of that. So I hope I've answered the question. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was definitely a great answer to the question, a very detailed response. We are a bit behind on time. I just want to check in with you to make sure that we can take a few more questions. Is that fine with you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we have a question here from Ohas. He says, West Africa's coastline is exposed to a variety of natural and potentially damaging events, which result in the degradation of the coast in the region and are mainly triggered by poorly designed infrastructure and inadequate management of the environmental impact. How do we mitigate these for sustainable development?
Yeah. Again, I think I addressed a bit of that in the previous question, but like I said, sometimes we don't even have an idea of the cumulative impact or the cumulative effects of the issues that we are faced with. Because like I said, there is limited data. We do not have spatial plans to know what is happening where. We do not have forecasted plans to see that, okay, so maybe in the next 5 years, for example, we have this area slowly eroding. At what rate is the erosion taking place? In 10 years to come, where would the erosion reach? How are we relocating people from these areas? These are all lots of questions that need to be answered. And I believe it's one of the reasons why we are here today. We are the next generation. How are we doing things? Are we doing things the same way, or are we changing how the narrative? Because for a long time, we have not really considered the environment in our decision making, right? So I really agree with you. Our coast is faced with a lot of issues. When you come to Ghana, for instance, now, like I said, beach tourism, beach recreation is springing up so fast. And when you go deep down into it, most of these resorts that are springing up belong to foreigners, okay? So foreigners come in, they come to put up all these massive structures at the beaches. They are nice, we all go there and all of that. The question is, what happens 10 years after now? Do we even have a plan? Do we know how our beaches are going to look like when we keep giving licenses to people to put up all sorts of structures along our coasts? Because for a long time, we as a people, we have really not cared about the sea. I mean, we build with our buildings backs facing the sea. But now there is a new wave, change that is blowing, that we are now looking more to the sea. How prepared are we for this? It starts from different places. Our whole planning system, development system, should really have a focus of our water bodies, our oceans, and other ecosystems at heart. We have done well with that when it comes to the forest areas, but then now we are making the noise about the ocean. And it's a collective job that we all have to do. It's really intense and it's massive. And that is what we are here to do. And we generate the knowledge, as we go on. All right.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Sagoe, for sharing those insights. We have another question here from Emmanuel Zanu, and he says, sand mining is a major activity in some coasts in Africa. I do think it leads to the disruption of the blue economy ecosystem if not sustainably exploited. Can you please highlight the effects vis-a-vis the benefits to the blue economy and how best to sustainably explore it for effective contribution to the blue economy?
Very good point. Again, the answer is simple: planning, and management. Okay. Sand mining has its devastating effects, but again, it is an economic activity for someone else. Okay. How do we manage it? Can we know the areas where sand mining is safe to do and those areas where it is not safe? Can we have a plan for sand miners to know where they can go to mine their sand and where they cannot go based on the profile of the beach that we have? Okay, certain beaches have very gentle slopes. They are not so short. They are long beaches. Others are really short. You just get to the beach and it breaks to the continental shelf or the slope. So it's information, it's planning, it's management. We need to understand what we have, where, and allocate uses. And that is why marine spatial planning or spatial planning in general is very, very useful and important. We have the plan, then we can allocate activities, and then people can have an understanding why this place is allocated, why this place is not allocated. It all boils down to that. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. I think we have just about 2 questions to run through before calling it a day. We have a question here from Ivaldo. He says, how can we increase the profitability of fishermen in a marine conservation area? How can we decrease fish catches and increase ocean resources? I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
Okay, let me attempt to answer this. It's a tough one, but yeah, of course. Anyone can also feel free. I know there are professionals here, so you can feel free to chip in anything if you have something on your mind. When it comes to profitability of fishes, you know, we have come to a point now with our fisheries where really our fishermen are not even catching fish, right? They are not catching fish. So when you even design conservation areas or you protect certain areas that prevent fisher folks from fishing, it is really not even going to make any difference because they are already not catching anything. Now, how do we increase profitability of fisher folks in conservation areas? There are different models. There are different models being explored. We are now looking at diversification of livelihoods, right? Which has been tried in various projects in various areas. I must say, mostly have failed because when it comes to fishermen, most of the time they are stuck with fishing and they do not want to look anywhere else. Sometimes you bring certain projects, they sign on and then they leave, go back to fishing. Now there is the issue of aquaculture as an alternative source of income for fishermen. It has been piloted in certain areas. The challenge with aquaculture is with the cost of feed, fish feed, one, and the whole more, let's say, more scientific research into the kind of species that can be cultured, because then we also have limited knowledge about the species that can be cultured. So usually it's limited to catfish and tilapia. So aquaculture is actually looking up to science, more scientific research into what kind of species can be cultured successfully, and also the fish feed, preparing the fish feed at cheaper prices that can be affordable for the fisher folks to go in, so that when, for example, you close the sea or you close fishermen from extracting fish from a certain area, they can fall onto that for a certain period and all of that. That is one challenge, even though certain fishermen are going into that and making profit. Another thing coming up now is shellfish harvesting. Shellfish is very lucrative. It doesn't involve a lot of financial input. And there are a lot of women and men that are involved in it. It's something that we are also advocating for people to go into. And it's a win-win. I mean, when you culture shellfish, you also help to improve the water quality of the area that you are doing it. So it's another alternative that is coming up. There is also seaweed culturing that is also coming up in certain areas. These are all alternatives that can help fishermen, to come out of this state that we are in when it comes to declining fisheries. I don't know if someone has something else to add to this. But this is what I would like to say about this issue.
All right, great. Thank you so much. We have two more questions here. There are some linkages between these two, so I'll just read them together so that you can address them in one sort of coordinated response. So Uriah says, how effectively can the coastal zone be managed, especially when we have most of the people in that area who are illiterate and in fact, it's mostly a slum community, example, Liberia. And Linda also says, what is the role of indigenous knowledge, that's of people living close to these ecosystems in coastal zone management?
Okay, so thank you for those questions. And I'm smiling because this is what I have been attempting to do. It's a lot of hard work and it requires patience. And usually it requires the communities building trust in you. For my PhD, I personally went, I was working in the Western region with two communities. One of the communities being Cape 3 Points. This is a very aggrieved community. Why? Because Ghana's oil reserve, the first one, was identified off the Cape 3 Points shore. And this community was promised so many goodies, so many jobs. You know, with the oil being extracted, they were promised that the port, a reception facility would be put there that will get the young people jobs and all of that. At the end of the day, all these promises, just a few people in the communities, like the chiefs and some people, benefited from these kinds of promises, okay? Leaving the community bitter, feeling left out, and all of that. And this is a place that I went to conduct research, to go and talk about establishing marine protected areas, okay? Now, when I did an assessment, like we spoke about, a coastal profiling of the place, and it was really difficult to get them to cooperate with me because of some of these issues. And because they were also complaining that scientists come, they come and use them to do their research, they go, never come back, what we call the research fatigue, right? So I determined that I would not be like one of those scientists who would just come and sort for information. The community never knows what came out of that assessment. They do not understand why you even came to do that assessment. They do not benefit from the science, okay? So after my work, after I defended the PhD, I decided to go back to the community with the results that I had, okay? And at first, I was willing to do that on my own, but luckily I got some funding to support me to do that. So I repackaged all the information I had in videos that are translated for them to understand. And I was using pictures and short videos that I had taken from their own community, not from a different place, not from, you know, outside of their community to come and show them, but I used things that they could relate to, packaged it and sent it back to them. And it's an engagement that I do from time to time, just to go back, okay, this is what I found out. And it's an ongoing process. It is not a short-term thing. It is really difficult, especially when you are working with people who are not very literate, who do not understand the issues. You have to find a way of communicating effectively with them. I spoke about packaging the story and sending it back. How would they understand it? There's a different way you package the story for politicians. There's a different way you package the story for local communities. And there's even a different way you package it to academics. So once we have committed to do this work, it is dedication. We have to understand who the audience are, who the stakeholders are, and we work with them. It might not be easy at first, but we're persistent. We are all human beings. When you are convinced about something, then you try to do something about it. Indigenous knowledge, very important. Still talking about trying to convince. You also learn a lot of things. How these are people who have worked, who have been in the communities for centuries. They must have been doing something right, you know, to have managed themselves till now. So you learn from them, you learn, and the right things that they have in the community, you add that to your communication package, you know. So there is a place for indigenous knowledge in all of this, because if you are even planning for the people, then you should also incorporate what they know in your planning. And this is what I would say. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the detailed response. There's one more question here from Ivaldo, and he wants to know, so superficially, what are the conditions to determine a coastal or a marine conservation area? He says, example for mangroves.
Are you asking the conditions to determine that this place is a conservation area? Is that what you're asking?
From the question, it looks like that's it, but we can.
Ivaldo, can you unmute and explain the question a bit further? Ivaldo, feel free to unmute and explain that question. Okay, I think he added to be established. Right, okay, so there are steps that you undertake to establish a marine protected area. Okay, it's not something you just look at and say, oh, I think this place should be protected. Actually, IUCN has a process that should be gone through to be able to design a marine protected area in a particular place. It starts again with assessments. You do so for a place to be designated as a marine protected area, there are certain conditions. Okay, so the conditions include the naturalness of the place. It shouldn't be a place that is already degraded. The landscape, how the place supports socioeconomic activities, the kind of species that the place support. Does it support endangered species, protected species? So all of this, there are quite a number of criteria that you go through, and before you meet those criteria, you have to conduct an assessment. For mangroves, for example, you have to know the carbon, the carbon, what do you call it? The carbon stocks, okay, and the amount of carbon sequestered by that mangrove system that you want to protect. So you have to do some mangrove carbon assessments and to be able to present the place for protection. And it's not a decision that is taken alone by a researcher. If you come up with a place that you want to have protected, there are certain stakeholders that have to be involved in the decision. Okay, so there are steps that you would have to go through to do that. But of course, the mangrove carbon assessment is one of the things that you would have to do. You have to get your plan, your protected area plan, validated, gazetted, and all of that. So these are steps you have to consider. Ivaldo, I hope you're okay with that.
Yes, he has responded in the chat box that his internet connection is not good. Okay. I'm sure that's why he wasn't able to speak up. But
that's fine.
It also indicated thanks. Okay. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Sagoe. I'm sure all the participants will agree with me that this has been a very insightful and engaging session. A lot of gratitude has been poured out in the chat box for your presentation and
Okay.
for you taking the time to deliver this knowledge to us. So we are truly grateful, and we certainly look forward to more interactions like these with the participants of the program in the months ahead. So thank you so much for taking the time. We'll leave you to your regular routine now, and I will ask all the participants to stay behind so that we can conduct our quick poll before ending the session for the day. Thank you so much, Dr. Sagoe.
Okay, thank you so much, and sorry for going a bit beyond the time. I really enjoyed this with all of you. Have a good day, and we'll meet again somewhere soon. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.